Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak to your group tonight. I'm honored and flattered to be with you. You know, when you think about it, writing a book is an act of arrogance. Imagine having a thought or an idea in your head and then asserting that others should be so interested in your idea that you should put it down on paper and ask them to read it. Yet that's what authors do all the time. And we are grateful when anyone reads what we write. Let me start with this quick overview. My book, Baseball, The Turbulent Midcentury Years, is a scholarly work exploring the history of organized baseball during the middle of the 20th century. It examines the sport on the field and off the field and places its development as both sport and business within the broader contours of American history. The book combines narrative and analysis. It pays attention to most of the seasons across more than 3 decades, while simultaneously exploring the sport's politics and its economics. More broadly, this work is set against the great tumults of the 20th century, the Great War, the Great Depression, World War II, and the post-war transformations that defined the decade of the 1950s. I want to do 2 things tonight. First, I want to tell you a bit about how this book came to be. And second, I want to give you a quick overview of its contents, what it's about. Let me begin to whet your appetite by reading just one paragraph. This is the opening paragraph of chapter 10, a paragraph that centers on Bill Veeck. Here we go. The idea, in the words of the man charged with executing it, was to sell beautiful Wrigley Field. That is, to make the park itself so great an attraction that it would be thought of as a place to take the whole family for a delightful day. Phil Wrigley, principal owner of the Chicago Cubs since his father's death in January 1932, was convinced that a team's daily performance and daily attendance went hand in hand. Young Bill Veeck was cut from a vastly different cloth from his boss, but he thought this conclusion was inescapable. Like Wrigley, he believed that, quote, a team that isn't winning a pennant has to sell something in addition to its won and lost record to fill in those low points on the attendance chart. As a boy, Veeck, whose father had run the Cubs for Wrigley's father starting in 1919, was pretty much free to roam all over what was then called Cubs Park. I am, he later claimed, with the extravagant flamboyance that characterized most of his life, the only human being ever raised in a ballpark. After his father's death from leukemia in October 1933, Veeck returned to Kenyon College in Ohio to finish football season, left school to move in with his mother and sister, and sought employment with the Cubs. Getting a job first as an office boy and later as Wrigley's assistant seemed quite natural. As an owner, Wrigley started slowly in Veeck's memory. He made sure the ballpark was painted. He widened the box seats. He shooed away sidewalk vendors and newspaper boys. He put ushers outside to direct fans to the entrances, and he trained ticket sellers to be polite. All these changes helped, but beautiful Wrigley Field did not come to pass until Wrigley put Veeck in charge of the project after the 1936 season. Okay, just one paragraph. Thank you. All right, the origin story. First, from 1986 to 2008, as some of you know, I ran the research center at the Sporting News. Lots of SABR members, including maybe some here today, used the research services we provided. In that capacity, I was once part of a panel discussion on the future of baseball research. In other words, where the field was at the time and where it was going. During that session, I met Dorothy Seymour Mills, the widow of Dr. Harold Seymour. Together, they had published two foundational books on baseball history. Baseball, the Early Years, that takes the sport from its beginnings to 1903, when the two major leagues settled their differences, and Baseball, the Golden Age, that moves the story forward to about 1930. Later, they added Baseball, the People's Game, to complete the trilogy. At that session, that panel discussion, I asked Dorothy what she would think if someone picked up the ball where she and her late husband had laid it down and wrote a solid narrative and analytical history of the game since 1930. Without hesitation, she said it was a good idea. She heartily approved. But who would write such a book? I was well connected in the scholarly baseball history and research community, and I asked many people if they were interested in such a project. Everyone turned me down, and nearly everyone said the same thing. Steve, you should do this. My first reaction was that these folks were crazy. I was not a professor. I had a full-time job and a family to raise, but I did think about it. And then one day I sat down to lunch with the late Dan Ross, then the director of the University of Nebraska Press, and together we hacked out the beginning of what became a book proposal. Once I agreed to submit a proposal, the first question was how to define the book chronologically. In other words, where to begin the story and where to end. The where to end question was easier to answer. I decided quickly that taking the story from where the Seymours ended to the present would be way too much. So I settled on 1960 as an end point. The reason was quite simple. 1960, as you all know, was the last season in which each major league had only 8 teams. 1961, I think we could argue, when the American League expanded from 8 teams to 10, would be the start of a new era. So that was the end point. But where to begin? You can't just start. You need a place and a reason. As luck would have it, I found the necrology section, the obituaries of the 1932 Spalding Guide called A Grim Harvest, an essay that noted the deaths of so many prominent baseball figures in 1931. That's when Ban Johnson died, and his successor, Ernest Barnard, and George Washington Bradley, who pitched the first no-hitter in the National League, and Jack Cheesebro, and Jimmy McAleer, and Charles Murphy, and Bonesetter Reese, an idiosyncratic physical therapist. Plus, before the year was out, Gary Herman and Charles Comiskey and Barney Dreyfuss a few months after them. So wow. 1931 seemed like a turning point, the end of something old and the start of something new. About that time, I recalled too, one of the first adult books I read as a teenager, Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August. It became my model. Tuchman opens her book with an account of the funeral of King Edward VII of England in 1910, the last time all the crowned heads of Europe, most of them related to one another, gathered together before the start of the Great War. Tuchman sets the scene with her account of this funeral, and I tried to do the same thing with The Grim Harvest. And with that, I had my beginning. But really, not just where to begin, but how to begin, how to do the research. I was twice blessed. The first blessing was that I presided over the Sporting News Archives, a great research library with thousands of books and thousands of brown envelopes full of newspaper clippings. When I started at the Sporting News in 1986, we subscribed to more than 100 daily newspapers. There were newspapers everywhere. The second blessing was that I gained access to the note cards the Seymours themselves had compiled for books they did not have time to write. The Seymour collection is located at Cornell University. and I was able to go there and mine what I soon learned was a very rich collection. In addition, I had the benefit of the tremendous amount of research and publishing that SABR members had done since SABR was founded in 1971, the date of publication, incidentally, of the Seymour's second book. My book, therefore, would be a combination of narrative, that is, the story of the game, and analysis, the why and the how. It would also be a combination of my own original research while incorporating the work of others, a project that academic historians call a synthesis. That's why the notes section and the bibliography are so long, some 74 pages. Now, does all this sound a little dull? Maybe so. I kept in mind that I was trying to write for both a scholarly audience and writing for a popular audience at the same time. I recall hearing David McCullough, the famous American historian, say, and here I paraphrase, history is not hurt by writing it in a way that someone may actually want to read it. And so that was my goal. I decided early on to avoid the heavy language of academia and also to avoid simply telling the story of one blasted season after another. I mean, when you think about it, baseball has no plot. There's a beginning, but there's no climax, no ending. There's always next year. The solution I found was two-pronged. First, I did not proceed strictly chronologically, season by season. Instead, I identified themes to each of which I return again and again as appropriate. Second, I decided to concentrate on people, to find one individual for each chapter, one person whose career encapsulated certain events and themes about which I wanted to write. So that's how the book came to be. That's its origins story. Now let me talk a bit about what it's about. Understand that even though I concentrated on people, I did not write a series of biographical sketches. Instead, the career of one individual winds in and out of each chapter, during which I discuss the game's history, its politics, its economics, and its relationship with the rest of American history. I wound up writing a prologue and 14 chapters. In a sense, these can be divided into three sections: the Great Depression, World War II, and the post-war years. The prologue and the first 6 chapters, which include some considerable backstory, focus on the Great Depression, and the persons profiled therein are Ernest Barnard, the second president of the American League, Connie Mack, Branch Rickey, Kennesaw Landis, Ed Barrow, and Larry McPhail. Here we look at such things as declining attendance during the Depression, downward pressure on salaries, reluctance to lower ticket prices, the contraction of the minor leagues, the advent of radio broadcasting, battles over farm systems and the minor league draft, and various innovations like the All-Star Game, the creation of the Hall of Fame, and the establishment of numerous postseason awards. The middle section covers World War II. It homes in on Hank Greenberg, Don Barnes, the owner of the Browns, and Yogi Berra. Here we see the reaction of baseball to the start of the war in Europe, FDR's green light letter, organized baseball's patriotic effort to contribute to the war effort while simultaneously trying to keep players on the field and spectators in the stands. The impact of the military draft, the pronounced decline in the quality of play, restrictions on spring training and in-season travel, the change in the composition of the baseball itself, and the annual debate over whether the federal government would shut the game down entirely. The third part studies the post-war years, and its main characters are Tom Yawkey, Bill Veeck, Red Barber, Ford Frick, Henry Aaron, and Bill Shea. Here we look at returning veterans, labor relations, race, demographic change, television, and the threat of government intervention, plus safer travel by air, old decrepit ballparks, problems signing young players more interested in attending college than playing in the minors, and the persistence of the peacetime selective service draft. It is a big book, admittedly, but I hope it is readable, and I hope it holds your attention. I hope, in short, that I have not been too arrogant. You can order the book directly from the publisher, the University of Nebraska Press, or from any bookstore. If you want a signed copy, send me an email and we can work that out. The book is available in hardcover. It's available as an ebook if you have an e-reader, and it's now available as an audiobook. So if you're tired of reading with your eyes, you can read with your ears. Let me conclude by reading just one more paragraph, and then we'll open it up for questions. This is from a chapter on the movement of franchises. Braves president Lou Perini owned one of baseball's oldest franchises, but even he had began talking about expansion. In 1948, Perini spoke to the Milwaukee Athletic Club as president of the American Association's Milwaukee Brewers, a team the Braves had bought in 1946 because we were in desperate need of a farm club. In his speech, he predicted that Milwaukee will be in a major league within 5 years. He surmised that the major leagues would react to the entreaties of the Pacific Coast League by expanding to two 12-team leagues. San Francisco and Los Angeles are ready for big league baseball, he said, and Oakland and Hollywood will be taken in too because of the natural rivalry. But he added, we can't run a league with 10 teams. Perini told his audience that Milwaukee will be the first after the coast cities, and he identified Montreal, Baltimore, and Houston as the 3 cities that would likely complete the new alignment. Later in the year, he formalized this proposal, saying it would make the majors truly national in scope. Perini suggested, too, that part of the deal would require the 3 Class AAA leagues to consolidate into 2. It's not a fair deal, he admitted, but should we penalize the fans of San Francisco and Los Angeles by preventing them from seeing Major League Baseball? 3 years later, responding to a comment by Chicago Cubs owner Phil Wrigley that the entire map of organized baseball should be reorganized so that baseball can keep pace with the growth of the nation, Perini reiterated his grand scheme. Now, not when world conditions are settled, but now is the time, he said, calling again for 2 12-team leagues, a revamping of AAA baseball, and an examination of whether it is timely to include clubs in such neighboring countries as Canada, Cuba, and Mexico. Facing the transportation problem inherent in expansion, Perini said simply, airplanes annihilate space. So there we go. All righty. That's the end of my presentation. Let me get out of the screen share here. There.
Bingo.
And there we all are. Nice to see you. I'm open for discussions, questions, criticisms, comments, what have you.
Steve, what happened to the Sporting News? Is it still alive?
The Sporting News is very much still alive. It is not a paper publication anymore. It is an international website. Go to sportingnews.com. It's available for free. There's no paywall. There's nothing on it you can't read without paying some money. And if you go to the upper right-hand corner, you'll see that you can not only look at sportingnews.com, but you can look at sportingnews.canada, sportingnews.england, sportingnews.australia, sportingnews.india, sportingnews.japan, sportingnews.the Philippines, I think. And all of those home pages appear in native tongue, not in English. It's an incredible international operation. The other thing I can say to you is that if you're familiar with paper of record, the digital version of the Sporting News that's available for free to SABR members, the new Sporting News is preparing a new digital edition, which will be much better than paper of record and will also be available for free.
And that will include all the way back to the 18 whatever, 70s?
Yes, all the way back to the beginning, 1886, a few years before I started.
Is this the same company that bought them when you were the last employee there in St. Louis?
No, this is 3 companies later.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what happened to all the stuff that you had in boxes?
Well, that's a very, very long story.
Well,
when the Sporting News, if you're really interested, Steve and the rest of you, I did an article in the Baseball Research Journal about 3 years ago called the Rise, Life, and Death of the Sporting News Archives. But basically, everything was packed up in boxes and sent to a warehouse in North Carolina for about 13 years. But after 13 years, when I was on the faculty of Lindenwood University in St. Charles, Missouri, we were able to bring the archives back to get everything that was in that warehouse in North Carolina and ship it back to St. Louis, its natural home. Unfortunately, as the archives was being ushered in the door, Lindenwood was ushering me out the door because of COVID. So the one person who knew more about this stuff than anybody else was no longer in their employ. Their loss, not mine. I'm happily retired.
So all the old books and things are now at Lindenwood.
That's correct. Yes.
Wow.
Stephen, I have a question for you. First off, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you, John.
I've been studying Clarence Pants Rowland here, and I'm wondering how much you ran across him, especially as you looked at the minor leagues, especially late 40s into the move west from the 2 New York teams.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you ran across, did the teams move in part because Rollins was very close to being successful in getting the Pacific Coast League turned into a major league? And they wanted to quell that because he had been working on that and he actually came pretty close.
Well, I don't think that Rowland, of course, was president of the Pacific Coast League during those years. His name pops up in the book the first time in 1917 when he's the manager of the White Sox. Mm-hmm. And then Comiskey fires him and hires John Mahoney. No, I mean Kid Gleason.
Gleason, yeah.
For those who've seen the movie. Yeah. Rowland petitioned on behalf of the owners of the PCL to turn the Pacific Coast League into a major league year after year. And Major League Baseball continued to erect hurdles that had asked the Pacific Coast League to jump over. And whenever they jumped over one, they'd say, oh, yeah, but we've got one more for you. Major League Baseballs were nothing, Major League Baseball owners were nothing if not conservative. And, they couldn't figure out, for example, if we have 3 leagues, how do we have a World Series? That question was so complicated, it just stumped them. And the answer to that question, they said, was we can't have 3 major leagues. So, that their thinking was so advanced that was the end of that idea. O'Malley and Stoneham moved west not to quell the threat from the Pacific Coast League, but because they realized it's golden territory.
Yeah.
There are millions of people out there who want to see Major League Baseball, and who will help us in different ways to build ballparks, Dodger Stadium in LA, and of course Candlestick in San Francisco. The impetus for further expansion, for moving beyond 2 8-team leagues to 10 teams each in 1961 and then 1962 internationally, the threat is not from the Pacific Coast League, it's from the Continental League. Branch Rickey's idea that I'm going to create a 3rd major league, forget the Pacific Coast League. We're going to put a team in New York, we're going to put a team in Houston, we're going to put a team in Toronto, we're going to find other cities that are big enough for Major League Baseball, and we're going to challenge the establishment, as Ricky loved to do. And baseball's reaction to that, not rational, not studied, but rather haphazard, was finally to expand. You want to read about this? Our good friend Andy McHugh's got a book called Stumbling Around the Bases, how the American League botched expansion time after time after time. You know, the American League expands twice. The American League expands a year before the National League does. The American League puts a team in Los Angeles. Okay, that's a good idea. And they put a team in Minneapolis, really. I mean, the old Senators leave, the new Senators replace them. So they get Los Angeles and Minnesota. The National League gets New York and Houston. Who wins? Right away, the National League's ahead. So hope that answers your question, Joe.
Yes, thank you very much.
Or somebody else.
No other questions? Come on, guys. Crickets. All I hear is crickets.
All right.
This
Steve,
is another Steve.
Yeah, there's the cover of the book there to jog your memory. Oh, Steve has one. Very good. Thank you, Steve.
Why did you choose Hank Aaron? I think I know why you did, but rather than Willie Mays or Frank Robinson or Ernie Banks or somebody like that.
It's a good question. You look for people to kind of symbolize what you're trying to talk about in each chapter. I guess I liked Aaron because of his connection to the Braves, one of the old franchises. Of course, he played in the Negro Leagues. Well, so did Mays, of course. So it was, I suppose, a tough choice. I suppose part of the reason, not that we don't know who Hank Aaron is, but Willie Mays would have been the easy choice, you know. And I went for a few names that were not unknown, but maybe one peg below the most well-known ball players. And I have a personal fondness for Aaron and for his story. His own autobiography, biographies written about him, they're just terrific books and worth studying. So maybe that's why I picked Aaron.
Thank you.
Oh,
David, you're on mute.
you got to unmute yourself, David.
How's that? Better?
Better, much better.
Okay. Ed Barrow, maybe you could say a few words about him. He basically was from Des Moines. He wasn't born here, but quite the character.
No, Ed Barrow claimed later on that he was born in a covered wagon, which was not quite true. But he was born as his family migrated west, got into a few business deals that didn't work out, and then passed on a couple that he should have stayed in. One would have been in early theaters, vaudeville theaters that eventually became movie theaters. He could have become rich then, but he got involved in baseball in minor leagues in Toronto and Montreal as a manager, as a field manager, and then as an executive, as a league president, and eventually as the man who was managing the Red Sox. When the Red Sox buy from the Baltimore Orioles a player who already was known as Babe Ruth, young, untested, really, but as you know, an athlete with absolutely tremendous talent and tremendous potential. Ruth was then a pitcher. Barrow thought, just like we say today, you can never have enough pitching. Barrow said, this guy, he's a pitcher. He's a pitcher. He's a pitcher. Harry Hooper, an outfielder on that Red Sox team, said, Ed, you watch him swing the bat? Maybe we should let him play the outfield a while. Barrow later claimed in his own memoir that moving Ruth to the outfield was his idea. That is, let's say, gilding the lily just a little bit. It was Harry Hooper's idea. We have his own words to testify to that. Barrow stays with the Red Sox for a while, then moves to the Yankees, no longer the manager, but the general manager. And when he asks where the checkbook is, Jacob Ruppert says, "Here, use mine." And of course, Ruppert is a brewer, not a Milwaukee brewer, a New York brewer with lots of money at his disposal. Really, I think, thinking about it, the first owner, well, I guess the Wrigleys were in the same category. An owner who didn't need his ball club to make a profit, even though they did. He had private money, unlike Connie Mack, who needed to make a profit to survive. And so when Ruppert opens his checkbook, Barrow can buy as many players as he wants, and he does, and makes trades. Very astute, good judge of baseball talent, and Barrow is also important to the story because for a long time the Yankees resist creating a farm system, and they're kind of on the landist side of the argument that farm teams are a bad idea for baseball. But eventually the Yankees do buy a farm team. Barrow is part of that. And when they do, Landis's goose is cooked. He knows he's lost the argument. He's lost the war, really. So Barrow's a key figure, absolutely key. Besides Branch Rickey, I suppose the greatest general manager of the first half of the 20th century.
I have a question about Bill Veeck. What was the most surprising thing that you found about Bill Veeck?
Well, we know all the surprising things about Bill Veeck. You know, we know all the gimmicks he pulled, all the ways he tried to get fans into a ballpark to see a losing team. I mean, I think one of the greatest things about Bill Veeck is that he was the first owner in the American League to integrate. That Larry Doby and Page came right after Jackie Robinson, and that Veeck paid Effa Manley for Larry Doby's contract, and I think that is to his greatest credit. You know, Tony, there are when you write about a figure like Veeck, you have to keep in mind who might be reading this book, and you try to understand that there are some people reading the book who know an awful lot about Bill Veeck, and some people who know maybe very little about him. So you have to tell some of the stories, but you have to kind of find a path between telling it all and not telling any of it. You know, you never say in a book like this, as you already know, blah, blah, blah. You can't do that. But I'm not writing a biography of Bill Veeck either. So it's kind of like the highlights of his career. And in fact, since the book goes only up until 1960, it leaves out a good chunk of what Veeck did later on. I mean, Disco Demolition Night is not in my book. Maybe next time. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Karen.
Yes. How can you, when you determine all these different chapters, and I think they're really interesting, how can you determine what's true and what's false and what's basically rumors or false?
That's a historian's job. I mean, I was trained as a historian. I went to graduate school in history and have 2 advanced degrees in history. And evaluating evidence is part of what we do. You make judgments. Sometimes you hedge your bets. You know, according to Veeck, comma, blah blah blah. That doesn't mean I say it's true. It means that he said he was true. Sometimes you state both sides of the argument. You know, X says this, but Y says that, and you let the reader make a judgment. You know, sometimes you decide where the preponderance of the evidence is. It's a judgment call all the way through. It's a very good question, and it really doesn't have an absolutely precise answer. Evaluating the evidence is what we do. I don't know if any of you, to change the subject here just for a second, I don't know if any of you are interested in English history, but we just watched a documentary last week about the Little Princes, the 2 little princes that Richard III supposedly murdered in the Tower of London. And it was very persuasive that he did not murder them. And then last night we watched a documentary by someone who had seen the first one and said, you know what you watched last week? It's all a bunch of malarkey. And she sounded very persuasive too. So there you go. That's what historians do. That's what keeps the profession alive. That's why someone will come along a few years from now and say, you know, this book, it's full of mistakes and we've got to correct it. And that's absolutely great. That's what keeps us going.
Oh, okay, because I know when you deal with Yogi Berra, you have the same thing.
Absolutely right. Yes. Yes. And, you know, in fact, we don't exactly know precisely why he was called Yogi. There are at least two versions and maybe three. I think I put two of them in the book. Take your choice.
Speaking of Yogi, how many of you have seen the movie It Ain't Over?
Yes, I have.
1, 2.
Worth your
Me.
while.
I have.
Absolutely, absolutely
Yes,
worth your while.
wonderful.
Yes.
And there is talk about the naming of Yogi in the documentary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think Fred Taylor has a question. Fred, you're muted.
Can I undo him? Fred, you have to unmute yourself.
All right.
There we go.
There you go.
There you go.
Okay. The Phillies moved into Shibe Park as tenants of the A's about 1938. And come 1954, it's the A's that have to leave town. What were the dynamics there that made the Phillies more popular than the A's?
Well, of course, the Phillies in the late 40s and early 50s were a pretty good ball club. Won the pennant in 1950, as you know, the Whiz Kids, or as Casey Stengel called them, the Quiz Kids. And in the years leading up to 1950, they were an exciting team of young players. Mac's team, on the other hand, were not. I mean, once he gets rid of the 1929, 1930, 1931 A's, sells or trades most of the stars, I don't think an A won a postseason award or came close until Bobby Shantz in 1952. And the Phillies had money. They were owned by the DuPont family, by the Carpenters. They could spend money. They could invest in young talent. Mac had no money. The business operation was falling apart, and his two sons, Roy and Earl, two of his three sons, were incompetent. They couldn't even agree when the time came. They couldn't even agree on a plan on how to sell the team. They were a mess, and so it's, you know, if you had to choose, I mean, you know, we had a number of cities that had two teams for a while and then only had one. If you had two teams, it would be the A's who would leave and the Phillies who would stay.
Thank you.
Of course, the A's now about to become the first major league franchise to be located in 4 different cities: Philadelphia, Kansas City, Oakland, and maybe Las Vegas, although I'm not so sure about that. We'll see.
Yeah, interesting.
And today there was a piece in the paper about they're going to have a team called the Oakland Bees, minor league team. The
Independent.
Oakland Ballers, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting follow up.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Any other questions for Steve? Steve, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank everybody for your attention.
It's been fun.
Yeah, I know some people who are buying my book as a holiday gift, and I'll suggest that to you. It's not, you know, I've not listened to the audio version, but someone else has and says that guy's pretty good. I did not narrate it, thank goodness.
Who did?
A professional book narrator, you know, whose name I don't even remember, but he knows what he's doing. My voice is not cut out for that, for sure. So there it is.
You did okay tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. And
Thank
again,
you.
if anybody wants a signed copy, just contact me by email and we can work that out too.
Okay, we have another author in the works. Present, Steve Dunn. Did you bring a copy of your book, Steve? Unmute yourself.
Well,
There.
I don't have the book yet. It's being completed as we speak. Hopefully it will be out the first part of December. I've seen all but 2 chapters of the book in electronic form. I've gone over and made several corrections that hopefully they do for me. The cover's done, everything's done but 2 chapters. It's called Pug, Fireball and Company, 116 Years of Professional Baseball in Des Moines, Iowa. Pug and Firebrand are nicknames of players who played in Des Moines. Pug was a white ball player. Firebrand was a black ball player. And I cover from the team's founding in 1887 when they were the Hawkeyes, all the way up through this last season. I found the Negro League history in Des Moines is fascinating. I didn't really know about that until there was a book published from the Chicago Convention about baseball in the Midwest. And there was a chapter in there about all the Negro League teams that played in the Midwest. And the games in Des Moines, for the most part, they counted as regular games in the standings. They weren't exhibitions. So I get into that quite a bit. You know, of course, Bob Feller played a role here, not as a player, but he pitched exhibition games. Satchel Paige pitched here. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and they played here in exhibition games. So there's all that. All the name changes, you know, I get into. Around 1917, that was fascinating because the state had a blue law back then. The legislature didn't get rid of it, so that season, the attorney general thought, well, since the legislature didn't repeal it, you have to enforce it. So, so I get into the effect on baseball. I think it was, I forget the name of the team in 1912, but the owner was arrested along with the players after playing on a Sunday. And so the owner finally appears in court, in municipal court. First time he'd ever been in court. And he and his lawyer argued that the baseball was not a business per se, and that they were not violating the state's blue law. They were just a form of entertainment that was necessary to keep people entertained. And the judge sided with him, not the state. So every time I go to a baseball game on Sunday in Des Moines, I think of that municipal judge in 1917 that said you can play baseball on Sunday. So it's things like that. I try to get into some of the social aspects too of what the world was like back then too. Yeah. Hopefully it'll be out another week or two, and gonna have a meet the author at Beaverdale Books in January. I've got that set up. It should have a flyer coming out pretty soon on that. So yeah, it's been fun. This all started about 7 years ago when I interviewed Sam Burnaby, the Cubs president and general manager, for a story I was going to do for SABR, actually, about the franchise, the ballpark. But SABR didn't pick it up, but a SABR member said, oh, I can put it on cmeds.com. And it was on cmed.com first. And so it's grown in a book 7 years later. Here's what I have.
Steve, who's publishing the book?
Amazon Books Publishing. And marketing is not my strong suit, so they're doing a lot of marketing with it too, which I felt, there's tons of ways you can go in publishing a book. You can do it yourself or vanity press and stuff like that. And my brother out in Washington is an author himself, so he kind of guided me to where to go, how to do it. So yeah, it's I just like to write. I love baseball, so I turned it into it. That's what I did this summer. Well, since last spring, I guess I was working on it. Yeah.
Steve, a question for you, this related to what Steve Dunn just said. Wow, there's 3 Steves here.
Yeah.
He mentioned Vanity Press. How close is McFarland to a Vanity Press?
Not at all.
No?
No, no.
Okay.
McFarland is a respected publisher. Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. They'll send out manuscripts to be evaluated by outsiders in some cases.
Really?
Oh
Okay.
yeah. They require footnotes. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And you don't have to pay them to publish your book.
They publish so many books on such a wide variety,
Yes.
just within baseball. I
Yes,
mean,
baseball is just a slice of their business. Yes.
baseball
Mr.
is,
Press Illustrated.
Yeah. Where would SABR be without McFarland?
Right.
Yeah.
How does McFarland keep their books out of the bargain bin? I seldom see McFarland books priced at $2 or $3.
I think they're really, really astute at figuring out how many copies to print. I think the press runs are small.
Yeah, I've noticed on Amazon, the price of those books is out. There's almost no discount on those at all.
Right. And they are kind of pricey for paperbacks. That's true. But if you don't look at the price and just look at the title, boy, they're irresistible. Aren't they, Steve?
yes.
Yes.
There's about 5, what do you call it? Traditional publishers. McFarland's one of them.
Traditional publishers
The main publishers
of baseball books?
Books in general. Books in general.
Really?
Yeah.
So they've been around a long time then,
I think so. Yes.
prior to SABR even.
I'm not sure about that, but maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because for many years I've had that in the back of my mind that they were just like a notch above Vanity Press.
No, I don't think so. No.
Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah.
Okay, time to go on to a new subject, I think, which is what are we going to do next year? SABR members, Field of Dreams SABR members. First of all, let's, my favorite thing is the almost annual Skybox on a Sunday. And the reason I picked Sunday, in case everybody doesn't know, or somebody doesn't know, is that it's cheaper on a Sunday. And so we can get most of the money reimbursed from SABR Central. Not all of it, that's why I still have to charge something. And the gap is widening, which is why what I have to charge has gone up the last few years. But I think it's still a bargain. And it's my favorite outing, as most of you know. Most of you who have been there, and I think most of you have been there. So is that something we want to keep up?
Sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
I see a lot of nodding. Okay, and there's a thumbs up, another thumbs up. Okay, I'll get out a questionnaire as to what Sundays we want to pick. There's a whole bunch of them. I'm looking at the schedule. The schedule is out, and the times now are on the schedule. At least the home times are. And there's only 2 Mondays with ball games this year. Interesting. Okay, so we will do the almost annual Skybox. Any other thoughts as to what we should do for other meetings? See you, Steve. Oh, there he is. Bye. I still would like to go to, at some point, Sioux City. We've been to every other minor league city and a couple of lower than minor league cities, Wooden Bat League, for instance. But we have not been to Sioux City. Any thoughts on that?
I was wondering, I was thinking of defunct baseball team.
Yes.
The history of some of them.
Are you talking about Iowa, Karen?
Yes.
Steve Dunn is probably your expert on that, I would guess. Ralph would know about too.
I
Charlie
just thought it was
Apatow.
interesting.
There may also be an opportunity. I'm working with the Dubuque Museum of Art, the Julian Hotel, and potentially the Field of Dreams. The Dubuque Museum of Art's bringing in a National Baseball Hall of Fame photo exhibition in 2024 from February to Father's Day. There's somewhere between 80 and 100 photographs that will be on display from sepia to black and white to color. And I'm doing an exhibition on local Dubuque baseball history, primarily focusing on the 1860s through really the end of our minor league teams. And a lot of the images will be related to the Dubuque Packers, which are defunct, as well as some of the much older early minor league teams from the teens and the 20s from the Iowa, Illinois, Indiana League as well. There may be a potential to try to do something in Dubuque with a visit to the Field of Dreams, as well as a visit to the Museum of Art. Potentially even see if the Julian, where I know Charlie Comiskey and Tom Loftus met numerous times with the Magnets from the Western League in the lead up to the creation of the American League, they may be willing to sponsor something.
I think that would be a great idea, a great, great potential. I think the photographs are, I'd be very interested in having a look at those. And I mean, there's a lot of potential things to do there. So
I'd love to even see us turn it into maybe a one-day symposium too, invite other chapter members or chapters in the general area and then open it up to people.
Who is the name of the guy who was involved with the Field of Dreams? SABR member, Dan
Evans. He's no longer, I don't believe, involved. They've transferred the stewardship of the field and the daily running of it to Travel Dubuque and Keith Ray, the original Ghost player, one of the original Ghost players. So I don't think Dan's as active in it. Things have slowed down a little bit. They've had some issues with supply chain materials, the construction of both the baseball complex, as well as the on-site boutique hotel, as well as the MLB stadium. So things are running a little bit behind, although they're still working out there. But there's been some shakeup, I think, because of that. Although there's still the camps and the kids in the summertime, you see Dubuque just littered with young baseball teams at all the hotels. I shouldn't say littered, but great, because they're definitely coming to the field to play in the tournaments.
So Dan is not the COO anymore of
Steve, I don't know if he is or isn't. You don't see anything from them anymore like you used to on their Facebook page or in the news locally with the different goings-ons and meetings that go on all the time related to money and getting different infrastructure put in place and the different stages it has to be done. His name was seen constantly and it's not anymore. So I'm guessing he's been somewhat removed from it.
And how about Frank Thomas?
Well, he still owns it. So him and his partner still own it, and they're still going ahead with it. It's just one of those things. It's taken time, and I think they're partially feeling their way through it as well as they secure money from local government, counties, the state, as well as, their investors.
Is it still probable that there will be a major league game in 2025?
Oh, I think I believe, from what I understand, well, first off, they had a contract to do 5. They've done 2, so they need to do 3 more over the next few years. That's been extended out just because of the building of the field, and then they're going to Birmingham in 2024. Has extended that time frame. I've been told confidentially, although there's nothing signed yet in paper, that they've basically verbally agreed to potentially up to another 11 games over the next 20 years. But a lot of that remains to be seen, I think, with how well Birmingham does. And if they have great success there, their desire is to do this all over. Little League World Series, military bases, other old parks that may still exist. If Birmingham is not a success, compared to the way the 2 Field of Dreams were, I think you'll see them concentrate more on the Field of Dreams. But I don't think the Field of Dreams will go away. I mean, literally 14%, I'm writing an article, 14% of all baseball Hall of Famers from its inception to today, 14% have stepped on the Field of Dreams. It's a pretty large number, considering the field wasn't built till 1988 and the hall went into effect, a lot earlier than that, in the 1930s.
So is that 14% of living Hall of Famers, or
all?
Really?
Yes, I have the list.
Okay.
Wow.
Interesting.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah. Thanks for that, John.
So if you want, what I can do, I can see about seeing if either the Julian Hotel in Dubuque, because it's very close to the museum where the displays will be and the exhibitions, if they'd be willing to potentially serve up their grand ballroom to allow us to hold some type of symposium and meeting in Dubuque. Or see, I'll talk to Keith Ray. I do have a call into him. He hasn't returned it yet, about potentially doing something out at the Field of Dreams, or maybe do kind of a trip out to the field, and then in the morning, and then a afternoon of symposium at the Julian, and then a banquet or something at in the evening.
No, the arts.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Whoop, go ahead, Ralph.
I was going to say, is the Arts Center, is that the old jail or the old?
No, that used to be once upon a time long ago. That's a county annex office now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's...
Just do what you can, John.
Yeah, if people are interested and willing to come to Dubuque, I'll definitely put some effort into seeing what the art of the possible is and report back to everybody, and then we can make a decision whether or not we want to proceed ahead or not.
When did you say the exhibit will shut down?
Father's Day.
Okay, so it's up till June, which we get plenty of time, I think.
And my guess is, if the Julian can't sponsor something, the Field of Dreams may be able to in April, before their season really gets into full swing, but we'll already be into baseball season. So it may be an alternative as well, but I'll explore all the possibilities.
Thank you. Thank you for offering.
Good.
I have an idea. It's a little out of the box, but
go for it.
So in doing this book, I write about where the first stadium was, and it wasn't really far from where Principal Park is now, on 7th Street and near the river. So they're not very far from Principal Park. I have no idea how to go about this. I would need help, but how about getting a marker to designate where that first ballpark was? Like 1887 to 1900, 1901.
Hell of an idea. We might.
I don't know.
We might even be able to get a SABR grant
That's what I
something
was
like
thinking,
that.
because I've seen on their newsletters that they give away money for that kind of stuff.
Right, right.
Yeah. I have no idea how much it would cost, who you go through. I suppose you have to go through the city, maybe the planning commission, I don't know, zoning commission, I don't know.
Probably would have to go through the city. The other thing is, I don't know to what extent you might get involved with the Corps of Engineers or something else, being close to the river there. When they're, but anyway, I think it's worth looking into. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean, 2 feet from the river, but somewhere on 7th Street there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be a neat idea since it's so close to Principal Park.
Mhm.
Is that
The
right
side of
across-
the park.
Is that right across the street from North High School?
No.
No,
The
no.
side of the park on Southwest 7th was on the north side of the river, and that's in the floodplain, and there's a huge apartment complex on that
Okay.
site where the ballpark was.
Okay.
So you'd
Yeah,
have to
that's-
locate it. Yeah, you'd have to locate it somewhere on a little bit higher ground.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, it was on the north side. The south side, you go up a kind of a hill on Southwest 7th. And yeah, it was open there in 1886, and they played that first game in 1887. So
I ran across a Sanborn fire insurance map that shows where that ballpark was and what was around it at the time.
Great.
Talking about the
Yeah.
first ball game in Des Moines, not the first night game. Is that right?
Yeah,
Well,
that's what he's talking about.
No, I'm talking about 1887, the first, where they first played.
And
First,
the first night game was in the 1930s, right?
Right,
31.
Okay.
but we did not have the first night game like everybody says we did.
That's right. Yeah, it's been disproven.
We had the second.
Yeah, but we got credit, and we got the official stamp of approval from President Roosevelt.
Right.
So NBC and everything in terms of
But it was
broadcast.
broadcast nationally, so we do have that on.
Mhm.
Steve, you
We
mentioned
also have-
earlier. Steve, you mentioned
also-
earlier about.
Whoops, one at a time.
Oh, you mentioned earlier about Sioux City as a possible site.
Yeah,
Steve Hansen is the director of the People's Museum, the public museum in Sioux City. It's a beautiful facility. They have a baseball display. He's a big baseball fan. I did a program up there this summer, and he said that they would welcome groups like SABR if this is maybe separate from a trip to Dubuque, but Sioux City hasn't seen us in a long, long time. And when I did my program, I had 70 people there in the museum, and some of the directors there I've known personally. One served on the State Historical Society with me. So I think Sioux City is anxious to get some kind of activity relating to baseball up there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that would be it. If we're going to go see a game, though, I don't think they start playing till what, end of June. I mean, their schedule is kind of.
I'd have to check the schedule, but yeah, if it coincides with the game, it'd have to be later.
if we're gonna drive all the way to Sioux City, I think we'd want to do two things at least, the museum and a game, I think. Yes, no?
Yeah, I think so. That's what we've usually done when we take SABR on the road anyway.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
Steve Hansen, you say?
Steve Hansen, yeah. He's the director of the public museum.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an incredible building there, and it's really great story about that building too.
Yeah.
No baseball.
Well, they have
Just-
in 1927 when Gehrig and Ruth barnstormed through Des Moines. The next day they played a game in Sioux City, and they have a small display of Babe Ruth memorabilia, including an autograph ball, some other things up there, and that so it's a nice. They had a big display because of Ragbri this year, but it's a beautiful museum. Yeah.
the hotel where Ruth stayed his last trip to Iowa has just been restored. So if you wanted to go overnight, you could go stay where Ruth stayed.
Oh, in Sioux City.
Sioux City, yeah.
Yeah.
That's when he was doing his thing in Spencer. And I guess there's an interesting newspaper article about that with him, the kicking back the beers and sort of having a great time. So anyway, and then plus earlier on, he was doing stuff. He and Garrett were like riding mules and horses and doing all sorts of crazy stuff at the stockyards back in the 30s, 20s, whatever.
Can you sleep in the bed that Babe Ruth slept in?
I don't know. I would be pretty worn out. I don't know if the room has been, who knows if the room is full. I think he had a suite.
Any other SABR related issues that anybody wants to bring up?
Just out of curiosity and kind of related to Steve Dunn's idea about the marker, do we know what's the time frame to submit and the turnaround to award grants from SABR for projects like these? I assume that they have a deadline that by a certain part early in the year you have to be submitted, and then they award it, I would assume mid-year, maybe at the
that's about right. I think it's like roughly 3 months. So January, February, March-ish, to get your application in, and then they award it shortly thereafter. We made a half-hearted attempt to get our website covered by a scholarship, and so I learned a little bit about that last year or the year before, but it is a very short time frame. But it's all spelled out on the SABR website, so I'll look into that. And I brought up the scholarship thing because I noticed it the other day when I was on their the website.
Does that Iowa baseball website still exist?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a new member. I'd hoped he'd be here tonight, but his hours are iffy. And he started a website of his own that is minor league related, not just Iowa, but in general. And so I'm thinking he might be a possibility to become our webmaster. Right now, Mike Coview is our interim webmaster. He would, I'm sure, be glad to let go of that. I haven't seen anything added to it lately. I was on it a couple of nights ago to make sure it was still running, which it is. There's a lot of neat stuff out there, but it would be good if we had somebody who had more time and to really get involved in it. You're on it prominently, Steve.
Yeah.
There's one of the subheadings is contributors, I think it's called, and you're one of them. John is one of them. There's a couple others, I think.
John Shorey is one of them from Iowa Western.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Bill Johnson, I think, is one of them.
I don't think Bill's in that particular section, but he's done.
Oh, maybe not. Yeah, we had to submit pictures and so on. I think he's got about 4 or 5 of us that he's got in there.
Right. So I haven't had a chance to talk to the new guy much, but I'm going to pursue that. I know that Mike would like to give up his interim job. Well, I'm not sure how long we have on SABR's Zoom site. I know we have at least an hour when we've gone past that. So if anybody doesn't have any other subjects to bring up, I think maybe we should wrap this up. Plus, it's getting to be later in the evening. Good to see all of you. We didn't really have a whole lot of time to do introductions. I think most of us know everybody else that's on the screen. Nice to see you, Carmen.
Good to be here. Thank you. That's good.
I don't think you were a member before when we've only had 2 or 3 Zoom meetings. And now.
Yeah, I was on one, I think, but yeah.
Now we're required to have one every year.
That's good.
To keep our chapter membership legit, so to speak.
That's
so
good.
we've had one for 2023, which is good. If we don't keep up our legitimacy, so to speak, we might lose our $350 a year that we use on the Skybox. So it's kind of critical from that standpoint.
Well worth it.
Keep on zooming.
Carmen, thank you for the baseball book.
Oh, you're welcome, John. I don't know, but I know you're trying to get rid of things, but you flew to mind when I saw it. I thought, well, you could hand it to a child in your family. So maybe.
Yeah, I'll be getting rid of. Anybody need more baseball books?
I know.
I've got to cut my 500 down to.
Oh gosh.
My wife and I, we're moving from our home in West Des Moines to apartment on Ingersoll, 40th and Ingersoll. It's about the same square footage, but I've got about 1,000 books, and I've got to get rid of a lot of about, I don't know, 300 or 400 for sure baseball books. So maybe I'll start bringing to actually meet physically, and you guys can pick some out. So, quite a few are autographed.
I bet.
Okay, I think we're about done. If everybody's happy with that now. All right.
Well, everybody have a nice
Steve.
Christmas.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
seeing
Merry
you.
Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night, all.
Happy holidays.
Yes, that's right. We're coming up with another big holiday too, counting New Year's.
Yep.
See you all later.
All right. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.
Bye.